What if all the history you learned in school was just half the story? Like, what if there are entire chapters of human history that were carefully edited out, so you'd never question the version of events that they fed you? But what if I told you that wasn't the biggest or the longest-lasting slave trade in history? When we talk about slavery, we usually think about ships crossing the Atlantic, the chains rattling on plantations in the American South. And once you hear how much money they made, you're going to start wondering why you've never heard of them before. This is a story that starts with the Prophet Muhammad and his companions conquering Mecca in 630 AD. Because once you understand that, you'll start seeing the world in a whole new light. And it continues for 7 more centuries, all the way to 1920, when the British Empire finally put an end to it. This is the unspoken dark history of the Arab slave trade. 12 centuries of blood, erasure, and silence across the deserts and coasts of the Islamic world. This is the story of the Barons, a group of elite Arab slave traders who built their fortunes on the backs of black African slaves. Stay tuned to find out how the Arab slave trade worked, how much wealth it generated, and why it was allowed to continue for so long. So how did this all begin? Why don't we learn about it in the same breath as the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade? Let's pull back the curtain. In 630 AD, when Muhammad and his followers took control of Mecca, they didn't just unify the Arabian Peninsula under Islam, they also absorbed existing trade systems, and that included the trafficking of human beings. Slavery wasn't new. Arab merchants had been involved in slave trading for centuries before Islam, as had countless civilizations. But under the caliphates, it took on an industrial scale. As Islam expanded, conquering vast territories across the Middle East, North Africa, and even parts of Europe, it also absorbed millions of people from diverse ethnicities. Many were offered a choice: convert and pay taxes, or become enslaved. And contrary to popular belief, these weren't always criminals or prisoners of war. Entire communities were targeted for the slave markets of Baghdad, Cairo, and later, Zanzibar. Historians estimate anywhere from 10 to 17 million people were deep enslaved over a period of 1,200 years. That is 3 times longer than the transatlantic trade. But why does this matter? Because the sheer duration meant that generation after generation was consumed by this system. It didn't just uproot families, it erased entire lineages. Imagine living in a village in Sudan or the Congo. One day, Arab slave raiders sweep in. Strongest boys and girls are tied up and marched north. Many die on the way: starvation, dehydration, disease, and those who survive. For men, a gruesome fate awaited. Most were castrated. The procedure was brutal, often done with hot knives and no anesthesia. Up to 90% didn't survive it. Those who did were sold as eunuchs to guard harems, serve in palaces, or work in administrative posts. As for the women, they were taken as concubines, servants, or absorbed into harems off, never seeing freedom again. If you want to see how far this trade reached, look at Zanzibar, an island off the coast of modern-day Tanzania. In the 1800s, it was effectively the global hub of the Arab slave trade. Slave caravans from the African interior, sometimes stretching for miles, arrived daily. Captured men, women, and children were forced to march hundreds of miles to the coast, shackled by the neck. They were then loaded onto Dhows traditional sailing vessels and shipped across the Indian Ocean to Arabia, Persia, and beyond. The markets were so well organized that local sultans grew fabulously wealthy. Clove plantations on Zanzibar thrived entirely on slave labor. Arab traders, known as the Barons in your intro, lived in extravagant palaces built on the agony of thousands. It's estimated that at least 50,000 slaves passed through Zanzibar every year at its peak. Do that math over decades. Yet when's the last time you saw a Hollywood movie about Zanzibar's slave markets? This is perhaps the most unsettling part. In the West, by the late 1700s and early 1800s, moral and religious movements began pushing to abolish slavery. From William Wilberforce to Quakers in America, abolitionists fought tirelessly. But in the Arab world, there was no such widespread movement. No flood of pamphlets, no pulpits thunderously condemning the practice. Slavery was embedded in the economic and social fabric. In fact, Saudi Arabia didn't officially outlaw slavery until 1962. Oman and Yemen, only abolished. It. In 1970. That means there are people alive today who were born into slavery in these countries. Why isn't this a bigger global scandal? Who decides which atrocities are memorialized and which are quietly brushed aside? So what do you think? If your ancestors were marched across the Sahara, castrated, forced into harems, and then forgotten by history, wouldn't you want the world to remember? Wouldn't you demand your story be told alongside every plantation tale in America? Maybe it's time we stop treating history like a buffet, picking the parts that suit our ideology and ignoring the rest. Because truth doesn't care about who it embarrasses. Truth only demands to be known.